All right, we are live. So I want to welcome Suzie Grieco. I'm turning the tables on Suzie because she invited me to the Recruit DC Getting to Know You event a little while back. And that at that time we had Tiffany, who was also on the board of Recruit DC. They've been really gracious. I'm excited for this event coming up. But again, this is the Where's Your Next Talent and Recruiting and Talent Vlogcast. And it is May 20th. Paul Bagan, my co-host, couldn't be here today. As always, we are sponsored by Higher Scale and Gannon over at Higher Scale, so we thank them for sponsoring the Where's Your Next Vlogcast. Suzie, why don't you introduce yourself today?
Oh, well, thank you. Mike, thank you so much for inviting me. This is such a pleasant surprise. I have my own sort of RPO agency. And when I say my own, I have two business partners. So it's a small RPO agency. And back, I want to say when I first started in recruiting, I was doing corporate recruiting and I was introduced to a nonprofit community called RecruitDC. They hosted sort of educational networking events. And I attended, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 of those events and totally fell in love with the content, what they were doing, how they were training. I had started my career in agency. And while as much fun as it was, I also realized we weren't doing things correctly. Like for longevity, to maintain candidate relationships, things like that. I was like, I could be doing so much better. And I was learning about that at these events. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. This is going to help me with the fact that I was struggling with every time I did Recruiters Are. It was such a negative search. And I felt strongly, if this is going to be my profession, it needed to be way better. So yeah. I attended events. I helped them with the marketing, doing some newsletters, and then I eventually joined the board. So I've been on the board, I want to say, for maybe it'll be 7 years this summer.
Wow, that's a long time. Well, yeah. I wanted to invite you on to give a little bit of a preview, what some of the topics are about for Recruit DC today. And then I thought you'd be a great person to talk to about recruiters who are kind of looking to hang out a shingle. What that looks like and some advice you might have for them. So I thought that'd be a good topic today. And then just advice in general for entrepreneurs in general, folks that may be kind of in the transition mode and trying to figure out, what do I do next? So that's really the spirit of Where's Your Next, in my opinion, this is what this is all about. And I think you've had a journey of your own that's been very unique, and it'll be fun to talk to you today. But let's talk about Recruit DC. What kind of preview you got? What kind of topics are going to be covered?
I have to say, I'm always excited because of the fact that we, at least historically, besides the COVID years, we do a three-track day of learning, if you will. And that's designed for junior recruiters or people who are new or interested in refreshing their basic skill sets. We do an advanced track for experienced recruiters. And then we do a TA management track. So nice. Each one of them is targeting topic areas around sourcing, which obviously, Mike, you'll be talking to some of the population there. DEI, or I should say diversity. There is sort of business concepts, business principles, like what is it that you need to learn, and each one. And the biggest topic, as you probably know, has been AI, how it will impact us as a junior recruiter, an experienced recruiter, and as a TA, team lead. What AI in our technology, AI on our in the tools that we're using in our recruiting tech stack, how that impacts what we do and how it impacts management in terms of profits, and how it will impact the jobs that we're performing as recruiters or as TA professionals.
That's great.
So,
yeah.
All of those topics. I mean, there's everything. And data, which to me is so important as a small business owner. I really am. I don't want to say I'm a data nerd, not as much as Tiffany is, but I'm somewhat of a data nerd, meaning I need to know what my metrics are. What is my, source to, interview to offer to hire. Like, what are the basic metrics, and having those numbers for my clients. We're also going to be doing a data-driven topic for our attendees as well. So I'm super excited about all of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I love that you have 3 tracks. I think that's something that SourceCon does as well. They have different tracks for different uh, ex- professionals. ERE I think does that too. So I love that while yours is a regional conference, it's actually expanded beyond. There's a lot of people who actually go to Recruit DC from other areas. Like for example, I'm from Utah, so and there's a wide variety of professionals that are even outside of Recruit DC. So I think it's an amazing event. I think that you all have done a great job with it, and it's continuing to have impact even beyond the DC realm.
And I have to attribute that to the fact that, when I first started attending these events, a lot of these speakers or presenters were local recruiting professionals who were looking for a way to sort of step into the spotlight and, learn how to present, those kinds of things. And some of them have gone from presenting at Recruit DC to international platforms, which is
Right.
fantastic. But I would say and originally when we started, we were probably a regional nonprofit, but I would say we definitely attract people who are on the Eastern Seaboard just because it makes sense, even though
Right.
our speakers can come across. We've even had speakers who came from across the pond. So
That's great.
the speakers themselves are diverse, but our attendees tend to be US based, Eastern Seaboard. And recently we've noticed a lot of teams are coming because of that 3-track system. And we also are offering sort of like a SHRM. I don't know how you describe it. You get credits towards your continuing education for SHRM certification. Yep. Exactly. So teams can really benefit from that, and each one of them going to a track that makes sense for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One thing I'm noticing more and more of as you bring up HR, a lot of postings right now, and I'll just say this for the job seekers out there: do not be afraid to take on an HR generalist type job. If you see an HR generalist role out there, they're starting to package it with recruiting. And so it's interesting. There's a few HR generalist roles out there where the recruiting is underneath that umbrella, and it always has been. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see it right now. Recruiters have always kind of been over here in our own discipline. And on the other side, HR has always kind of had recruiting mixed in to some degree. Now, it's just interesting to see more and more recruiting-centric HR generalist roles coming out. So you bring up the SHRM certification. I think it's important for us to know that. And it's just, we should always be open-minded. I'm taking a look in my transition search right now at more of the HR roles as I kind of continue to get involved. I would encourage recruiters especially, get involved with your local SHRM chapter. If you're in transition, start reaching out that way. Later on this Where's Your Next Vlogcast in about 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have Elisa Garn, who actually works for SHRM, and she was the president of the Utah SHRM. And that will be fun to have her on, because I've been wanting to get her on for almost a year and a half, and she is amazing. So that's going to be a really good episode in a couple weeks. But yeah, I think so. I like that you have the different tracks. Is there, tell us about some of the speakers. Do you have some insight into some of the speakers? And
I was going to say, I'm going to start off with the keynote. The keynote speaker is really presenting on how to thrive in times of change and adversity, if you will, which is a fabulous
exactly right
topic,
now.
Which is, because all
with
of
the
us
last 4 years, right?
Whether you're a small business owner or you're a corporate recruiter or you're an agency recruiter, all of us has felt the impact of the market. And so either you might be one of the unfortunate ones who were downsized and looking for a job, or even if you were considered fortunate and kept a job, but now you're doing the role of 3 or 4 because they are asking that of you just because they've let go team members. That's all descriptive of change, meaning, and how do you use change to your advantage?
Yes. How do you adapt?
I personally have definitely seen, I have a perspective on job seeking that may be too optimistic, but I always saw it as an opportunity to have a conversation with people I typically may not have had exposure to and learn from them. So I approach every potential interview as more of a an exchange of information. What do I need to learn from you to understand your industry? Especially at some point in my career, I was thinking of doing executive search. And I basically pretty much talked to anyone who would talk to me who was in that industry. Eventually, I found out that is not for me. That is not my kind of recruiting, but I had fun doing it. And to be honest with you, if you ask me to do it all over again, would I do it? The answer is absolutely yes, because I've met some really great people who are in that industry, even though I didn't end up going down that path.
Yeah, let me share a thought that has been with me since I made a career move about 3 years ago, and it keeps just coming back because it's one of those things I have to think back on. I made a decision in 2021. I'd been with ADP for 9 years, and I'd been promoted 3 times. I'd had a lot of amazing success. I was starting to get pretty well known in the recruiting world, for presenting and my articles and whatnot. And then I kind of got to a place where I was like, okay, I really want to figure out what my next move should be. I wasn't sure, and I was pondering. And then I got a call from the LDS Church of all places. I wasn't expecting that, but they recruited me. I went over there for a year and a half. I knew going in that I would want to stay for a little while. I wasn't sure kind of the timetable of how long. So about a year and a half to 2 years was kind of my mark. And so I wound up staying there for about a year and a half. The reason I did it is because they are the largest employer in Utah. So and like I said, they recruited me, and I made that move because I felt like it was good to get international recruiting experience. And I always remember you're talking about dealing with change, and sometimes you impose change on yourself. And the thing to kind of think about, I always go back to this advice I got as an HR intern way, way long ago. So now I'm dating myself. But when I first started in HR and recruiting, my HR director at the time, her name was Judy Wallace, and she worked at Applied Materials. I know she's now retired, but she said this to me at the time. She goes, always leave the door open for a growth opportunity, no matter, even if it feels uncomfortable. And that's what I did. I was like, okay, I've been with ADP 9 years. I need to spread my wings and fly. And so I went and did international recruiting. I experienced an implementation of a recruiting ATS, which I'd never done before. So I got some experience that I didn't have yet. And then I went to the Source and Recruit company a little bit later, just about the beginning of 2023. And I was hoping to stick around for a while, but I got to learn business development. Now, was that character building? Sure. I mean, at the time I thought, 2023 seems like it's going to be kind of gangbusters. It seems like we're going to, still have opportunity. But then there was all these whispers of layoffs and things. I was like, well, I wonder if it's just because they overhired. Well, little did I know that the Fed would keep raising interest rates, and then that would kind of slow the gangbusters scenario that we were in at the time. And, about November last year, my old boss, he came to me and said, hey, I was hoping we could help you hit your goals in terms of sales here. I know it's slow right now, but unfortunately I have to redistribute or redeploy resources and strategically. And it was, he wanted, I think, at the time, I know he wanted to keep me. I think there was that good friendship there. He's an amazing guy. But again, he had to shift resources, and that's why I had to make a move, right? And it was hard because we were trying to hit our sales out here, but it was slow, really slow out in Salt Lake City. Tough market to sell in. But hey, it was character building. I learned a lot. I was able to get potential prospects to the table. It was a good experience because I grew from that. So just the point being, you always have to keep growing, keep adapting, keep focused. And that's been a good lesson, especially, in transition. I've learned, how to pivot a little bit. Like I've been doing gig work. I've been doing creative ways to keep myself busy.
I love that. I've been following
stuff like
a little bit of your journey, and I'm loving, because you are the embodiment of really understanding the transferable skill sets that you have. I mean,
right.
A little bit of HR, a little bit of sales, because I think there's a lot of overlap between what we do as recruiters that happens to both of, in both of those areas. Like for me,
for sure.
I've always believed our industry is the intersection of human resources and marketing. and you've sort of demonstrated that in all of your careers.
Yeah, and each move we make is an opportunity to kind of pivot and grow. And I think, I've seen a lot of recruiters out there that are struggling. I know that I have friends that are in this boat. Some of them are trying to decide, should I stick to it? Should I make a career pivot? And, here's a few options that I think are important to talk about. Can you do sales? Could you pivot to another industry where sales is red hot? Give it a shot. I was over in the HCM world, and I have a lot of contacts in the HR tech side of the house and the recruiting tech. So I've expanded my career search into those realms to see where that may take me. And, it's interesting. I have a couple of irons in the HCM space that could turn into something. We'll see. And today I'm all dressed up because I'm going to an interview, right? So and each,
awesome.
I will say this, each interview you take and do, you get better. So it's a very strange reality.
100%.
I had two really close scenarios where I was just about to land. And I actually, when I went to one of those interviews, I didn't quite feel right about it. The pay wasn't quite right. And the other one, the industry was okay, and I wasn't sure. So I turned a couple offers down. But again, it's all about what's going to make you happy, and knowing yourself. You're going to have tough decisions to make as a job seeker in this environment. It's
Right.
like, oh my gosh, I need to get money in the door. You're going to, you got to be true to yourself. And I had a dialogue on this. I used to be a Boy Scout, right? I'm an Eagle Scout. One of the things I talked about was true north. What is the true north of your career? What is that? And what does that look like? If you know that for yourself, your decision-making process in your career track is going to be so much easier, because you have to kind of keep that at the forefront, right? And for you, what gets you out of bed every day? I wanted to ask you that question.
Well, I learned early
as an
on.
entrepreneur.
No. I learned early on in my career that I loved two things, and that is constant learning, which has been integral to, but who I'm learning from. So it's my candidates and learning from my clients. And so what keeps me up is like, or what gets me up in the morning is I know I'm going to be, at some point during the day, I'm going to learn something. It may not be something I apply, but it's something about an industry. It's something about a profession, something about, sometimes people share with me, they're getting their master's or their PhD, and they'll talk a little bit because they're excited about what they're doing. And they'll share with me, their research for their, thesis. At some point, I know I'm going to learn something new, which I love about my job. But it also limits me to the kind of jobs I could do. Like, could I do recruiting for something that wasn't constantly in a state of flux or evolving? So if I was recruiting for positions that never changed, or the functions never changed, or could I do that for very long? Probably not. I learned that about myself very early on. So I already know.
That's interesting.
So as much as I thought I would learn from, the C-suite if I was doing executive search, I knew there was things about me that I'd sometimes overshare. Like, I get excited about the company I'm representing, but there's a confidentiality component sometimes when we talk about executive search. I was like, I will not succeed in a very highly confidential space. And I love sharing things about my clients as well as my candidates. So that's what gets me up every day. Would I do my job for free? And my clients know this. I would do my job for free, but I can't. I've got 4 kids. I got a house. I got a mortgage. I've got food that I need to be able to purchase. So I love it. And even though this market has been a little bit slower, we're taking this time as a team to really fine tune our processes, because we implemented some new technologies from a sales perspective, from a recruiting perspective. So our tech stack has evolved. And we're sort of fine tuning it to make sure if and when we get something, we can hit the ground running with those pieces. I'm taking advantage of all the free online, training. So staying abreast of what's going on. There's a lot of it going on with AI. There's a lot going on with diversity. There's a lot going on with more the HR pieces, like what you can and cannot ask. Like I'm not an HR person. I'm not a benefits person. I'm not an admin in that way. But I need to keep abreast of what are the laws that are impacting my industry, because I got to know, even though I'm in a Virginia state, I can't be asking certain questions to certain people from California or Boston so I need to be aware of that. So constant learning is what I love about
Yeah,
my
like
job.
even pay transparency laws. That's an interesting, one of those things. If you're talking to a candidate in California, for example, you're gonna have to be very careful what you say, and you can't ask them what their past salary history was. You can't do that, right? And so it gets really interesting. I think the key to the whole thing is what I've learned just in the past few years is always be adaptable, because right now everything's changing so fast that, I mean, when it comes to AI, for example, there's so many things that AI can do. Like ChatGPT is an amazing tool from the standpoint of what recruiters can do with it. And so, like, I'll give you an example. If you need a job description or need to put out something creative for a posting and you're not sure where to start, go to ChatGPT, type in essentially what you're looking for, give it. See, the thing with ChatGPT is the prompts have to be good. And if your prompt is good, then everything else kind of follows from there.
And the reverse is true if you're a job seeker, meaning I can take my resume and the job description and say, pull out the highlights of what I've done that sort of mirror what the job description is looking for, and emphasize that and use it in a tone that makes sense. Like, what are the impact statements that would be relevant for this particular job? I don't say that I use it every day, but I use Gemini. So I'm a Google shop, so it is what it is. But I have to remember, I can't put any confidential information on there. Again, being very careful what I'm putting in there, that I'm comfortable that it's already in the public domain, because I can't put my, pieces that are not public in that. But otherwise, I use it for fine tuning almost every communications that is public domain, and love it, because that's where I used to freeze up. Like, I would say, oh my God, I got to write this newsletter. I would freeze and I was like, okay, put it off. Now I'm like, okay, this is what I need to do. Give me a calendar, give me some topics, and it's sort of like a starting point.
Yep. Yeah. And business development, for example, you can write some pretty amazing business development reach outs just with ChatGPT, depending on how you word it. But there's also, ironically, as a job seeker, it's just insane what you can do with it. And that leads to the other side of the coin. Like, if you're in a screening with a candidate, you actually have to be careful you have to kind of have a sixth sense to say, was that written with AI? Because is it coming from the candidate, or is it coming from, I'll give you an example of what that's like.
Oh, you mean before you talk to them, or while you're talking to them?
While you're talking to them. And here's why, because if you're talking to like a software engineer, the software engineer could actually use ChatGPT to answer your questions. And so you have to and they may not be very good as a programmer. So it's just an example. I heard about this from an actual AI guy who was working on AI, and he said one of the things to watch for is if their answers are so fast instead of the little thinking. The way you can tell is if you see them, that if there's thinking time to get you the answer, then you know that they're doing it on their own. If it's instantaneous and they answer really fast, then you know that there might be some AI, and you might want to, ask some further questions that can. So you have to kind of watch it, even in a technical interview, because lots of software engineers are doing that now. They'll go and they'll pull out this information, and then they'll actually, in an interview. So that's why tools like HackerRank or a live coding thing where they can't fake it. They actually have to be doing it live. So you may want to have a tool in the screen that's having an assessment going simultaneously. It's an interesting concept, but it's something to watch for sure. These are all things that AI brings up, is what are the new realities of what are the challenges are. And it's this kind of stuff.
Yes,
just a whole host of stuff.
I'm a tech recruiter, so I talk to my clients about this all the time.
I'm just saying, be careful with it because you
Yeah,
want to.
no, 1,000%. I 1,000%. I'll talk to my clients and say, in some cases, I can tell someone's reading something because they've taken my question, they've typed it somewhere, and I can see them reading the response, which seems, again, that I don't like. But
That's what I'm talking about mainly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's caged. But so when you transfer to a behavioral questions, they can't adapt. Like, describe a situation that you've applied. Like, tell me what you did. What was it? How did you overcome it? Those kinds of things. Those are kinds of questions that you can type into ChatGPT and provide you with any type, because it has to relate to what they've written on their resume.
Right.
So that's, so I think there's an easy way to get around that. But when we're talking about technical, sometimes I keep thinking, you want your person to be able to use whatever resources are available to them to get the job done really well.
You've got a good point. Yeah.
Right. Whether I pick up the phone and ask, my twin sister, hey, how did you do this? Or if I Google it, does it really matter how I got that information? Right. As long as I figure out, okay, I don't know this.
And that's where you use your best judgment, because you don't want to shoot the candidate down necessarily if they're using a tool, because that's the way of the future. And so Mike Wolford actually talked about this quite a bit. And he made a case in he came to he lives in Utah with us here. And at our local Utah gathering of recruiters that we have, Recruiters of Utah, he talked about this. He said, do you want to discount a candidate because they're using tools? And I think it's a two-edged sword, because if the candidate can show that they know how to use AI to help them be better at their jobs, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
100%.
So and I think that's where you have to kind of draw the line. If they have the basics down and they know things pretty well, and that's why this particular job search environment is so unique as well, because we're dealing with a wide variety of issues that are new. Mm-hmm. And that's why in this time, I think the greatest advice I can give anyone is, whether you're employed or whether you're in transition, is keep adapting to the environment you're in and keep learning, because the learning piece is what makes you valuable.
Right.
Now, you may not have dealt with something specific. You may not have had experience in a certain area. Or see, that's here's the other thing that I've seen a lot of, and I don't know how you feel about this, but there are a lot of recruiters getting rejected on first pass because they don't have the quote unquote industry experience. But they could be a really strong recruiter, and that learning the industry isn't necessarily always valuable, because what happens if you have a new idea that comes from the recruiter who has come from a different angle? They're going to come in with new ideas. And this is where it gets interesting, because this environment with hiring, we have to I think the best thing we can do is not be order takers. And we actually have to think out of the box and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Hiring Manager, have you thought about this? And here's why. Because I've seen blanket statements from people who said, well, I would never consider a candidate that was in this situation, or, whatever the circumstance is. And it's where sometimes I'm like, okay, I know it's an employer's market, but here's the other problem with the way they're seeing things. It's almost like they've gone back to 2008 all over again, and they're having outdated views of the job market. Like, remote work is another great example of this. You see people that are saying, well, we have to have everybody in the office and all the time. But take the best of both worlds. I mean, if you need folks in the office for innovation, great, but do a hybrid,
Yep.
And that's where find the best of both worlds, because what we're learning now and where the pivot is coming is that people are kind of like, they see the value of remote work because it helps people to adapt and work. I mean, here's one thing why remote work is so important. The other day I saw a statistic that upwards of maybe 60% of folks, in even just right now and going to the next few years, are going to have multi-generation households because of the cost of housing. So you're going to have aged parents that are, baby boomers living with Gen X and Gen Y. And so all the way down, like multi-generation households with maybe 20 people living in the same house. So it's like crazy stuff like that.
Okay.
And it's out of necessity because the way our society is evolving. So remote work, imagine trying to get someone to come to the office full time. And it's a key role that you want to fill, but you have no flexibility. If that person has a choice between two opportunities that are exactly the same, and their skill set is in demand, are they going to go the place with remote work, or are they going to go the one that's restricting them? They may be willing to negotiate on salary just because of the remote work.
I'm thinking, if you have a multi-generational household, you need to get out. I'm like, take me to the office all day long. I would take that option.
No, seriously, I'm just thinking of all the different nuances of it, and these are the types of adaptations we're seeing right now, and it's really interesting, and it's affecting the strategy of how people look at these things.
Well, I'm a parent of 4. They're older, but the bottom line is I know how remote work impacted parents, and the fact that now, post-COVID, they got a taste of what it was like to be at home raising their children and being there in real time after school.
Flexibility, yes.
Yep. Exactly. If I had a choice at that point in time to say, I'm doing the same job, remote or in person, I'm going to realize I'm going to compare that to all the things I'm losing. What is my cost of taking that job if there's no financial difference?
The commute cost of going into an office and spending money on gas. It's another thing to think about. And these are all fascinating things. I think RecruitDC is going to cover a lot of these matters in real time, which I think is great. And this is another reason why, LinkedIn Learning is actually free for a lot of, there's a lot of LinkedIn Learning out there that I think is great. And I've been taking advantage of some of the programs because I like some of they're just some really good opportunities with thought leaders that are out on LinkedIn Learning. And so the more you learn, the better you are. And I would encourage people to continue to go to in-person events. Like I think one thing a lot of professionals have gotten away from since COVID is now they're kind of in their own little bubble. And in some degrees, you got to force yourself to get out of that bubble and go to events. So if you have a local event that you can go to, please go to it. It's going to make you a better professional. It's going to make you happier. It's going to help you with your mental health. It's going to help you with a wide variety of things. And since COVID, honestly, the other issue is mental health in the workplace. It's even more prevalent now, and people aren't talking about it. So sometimes I worry about people that are, not getting out of their bubble to go reach out to people. And I worry about recruiters in our industry that are burned out. There's 2 types of recruiters right now. The burned out ones who don't have enough help where they are because of budget. And then there's the ones that are in transition looking.
Right.
But that's where one of the things that's made recruiting a great profession for me is the opportunity to go visit my fellow peers and learn from them. Because every time I do that, I'm re-energized. I get back in the game. I feel like, okay, I'm ready to go a few more rounds. I'm ready to face what life is throwing at me. And quite frankly, in this transition, were it not for my friends in recruiting, people I could pick up the phone and call and talk about and say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. What are you going through? And then you start to go, wait a minute. I'm not alone. These are issues that are affecting everybody.
Right.
And it's more universal than you would imagine, right? So I wanted to ask you, for the final 10 minutes here, your journey as an entrepreneur, and really kind of cover that a little bit. Because there's a lot of recruiters who are maybe interested and maybe even folks who are thinking in their transition right now. Should I start a business? Should I go into work for myself? And what does that look like? So what's been your journey there?
One of the things that I love about this industry and the competition sort of screams at this, low barriers of entry for an RPO agency. You don't necessarily, there were, at the time when we started, there were free ATSs. There were tools that we could purchase, or we didn't have to purchase. We were literally just using open source materials. And I think at that point in time, the open source for phone numbers, I think Dean DaCosta was sort of writing the novel about open source sourcing. So all of that was free. So I leveraged, and this may be easier depending on your tenure in the industry before you make the leap. I was able to really leverage the connections I had made supporting hiring managers during my tenure, both as an agency recruiter and as a corporate recruiter. All of my clients typically have come from referrals from either candidates who become hiring managers and remembered I had worked with them as a recruiter. I love that. And a lot of the business had come from hiring managers who'd switched from the corporate environment I was in to starting their own companies or going to other smaller organizations and saying, I need some recruiting help. So that was one of the benefits. So learning how to do things right or doing things right and being a partner, a consultative recruiting partner in whatever role you've had, whether it be agency, whether it be corporate, those people will remember you. Either the candidates who will come back to you and say, you gave me the best recruiting experience out of all the agency people I've talked to, or the hiring manager will say, you told me when it was realistic, like the purple squirrel was not going to happen, or you told me, if these are the skill sets you're looking for, it's going to be 6 months. Like you were realistic with me. You weren't just a yes person saying, I can do it and then not delivering. Mm-hmm. So the reputation that you
great
build.
Advice. So much true.
The reputation that you have working with the people you're working with now in good times and in bad times, they'll remember that, when you decide to put your own shingle on the door and say, I had a good experience, both as a candidate from her or them, as well as the hiring manager. I liked the interaction. I was always maintained. I was updated on a regular basis. I didn't have to ask, where are we? Where are we on this? Where are we on that? Where's the candidate pool? Those kinds of things. So that is the foundation you want to set for yourself now. If you're
such great advice, and I'll add to that. I think, I'll living example of this. I've seen in my own job search, I've got people reaching out from my past who are checking in on me, and these are all I got candidates and managers and a whole host of people that are like, I'm keeping an eye out for you. And I'm keeping an eye on my network. And so one great exercise you can do, whether you're in business for yourself or if you're an in-house recruiter, is pull your network from LinkedIn down every now and then. There's a way to go and pull your entire network. And if you just go to your privacy, under your settings, under privacy, you get my data, and then you pull it out, and it'll send you a spreadsheet of every single contact you have. And then what you do is you go through and you highlight the ones that you remember, and start going through and highlighting the ones that are really good. You have a really strong relationship with. Maybe it's been a while since you checked in on them.
Right.
Reach out to them, send them a note, and say, hey, I want to get back in touch with you. Like for me, I have a 15K network, right? And it's been amazing.
Wow. That's impressive.
It's grown. I mean, I must have been LinkedIn. I joined LinkedIn in 2005. I must have been like the 500,000th member or some crazy number like that. So it was interesting because it was back in my agency day. That was my first agency job at Venturi Staffing. And I pulled down, I didn't know what I was getting to at the time. I was like, what is this LinkedIn thing? And I'm used to the job boards. But yeah, ever since then, just I can go back to that network and I can pick up the phone and still call people. And I can have amazing conversations because of what you just said, which you treated them well. I mean, whatever happens, even if you have a really tough hiring manager, one that wants you, one that makes you feel like, oh, I got to be a yes person. I've got to be an order taker for this person, or they're going to get mad at me. Don't go there. In fact, push back on that person a little bit. They actually respect you more if you come at them with original ideas, backed up with data, and then you say, here's a best practice that will help your life be easier. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had like that, where I've got this person on the phone, and I'm pushing back on them a little bit. And it's in the professional, right? I mean, you just say, hey, have you thought about a different way? Here's an idea for you to think about. And you put it in an email, and have a peer read that email, or have ChatGPT help you with it. Just craft something that's
okay. You can't ignore ChatGPT. Say this in a much nicer way than originally I was going to write.
So if you're in a stressful moment, the way you react to that situation professionally
Right.
I mean, and we've all felt stress recently in these last few years. Let's just say it. It's prevalent. This is a very stressful time to be a recruiter,
Right.
but it's also a great time to be a recruiter, because if you can rise up to the top and be the type of person that's adaptable and change, and then professionally push back on your leaders, they're going to remember that.
Right.
And of all the tips and advice I think I can give, that's one of the best things I've ever learned in my career, is never be afraid to give a new perspective.
Right. Well, and I've never seen this, I've never seen my career as a recruiter as an order taker. I've never seen it as a transactional role.
Yeah. Nope.
And to be honest with you, that would be a disservice to
it is.
my
Yeah,
hiring
you're absolutely
managers
right.
and to my company. Because like you said, you never know what's going to happen with that interaction. Either they will become a candidate or a client. Like at some point in your lifetime, that interaction will be either a referral, a candidate, or a client, period. So you go into it with that perspective, and if you see that hiring manager as someone you have to kowtow to, they're never going to come back to you, because they realize they can't get what they want from you, which is real live advice, like realistic timeframes where they're not managing, where you're managing them, and they manage their manager's expectations to say, this spot is not going to be filled for 6 months because this is what the data is showing. You hire one of these people every, 3 times a year.
Yeah.
The job description
Well,
is
and I'll say that, as you start noticing patterns, start backing best practices up with data, and keep an eye on what's happening in the industry. And you'll notice it's interesting, even the titles within recruiting are starting to change in-house, like talent advisor, talent acquisition business partner. HR has also evolved in that way. People are starting to call themselves people operations and other things. There's other titles like these. So at the end of the day, what we're doing is lifting the profession. That should be our goal every time. And we're getting to the last minute here, but I've really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at RecruitDC.
I know. I'm meeting you in person. we're very fortunate to have you as part of our lineup.
Yeah, and I'm glad you came on today to get any parting advice for folks that are out there right now. Anything you can think of that you want to share?
It's all about attitude, like you said. Regardless of the situation in the mental health impact that this stressful situation, recognize it, address it, don't ignore it, because it's not going away anytime soon. So do what you need to do to help minimize the stress. And I think in the long run, it'll improve your interactions, both from a recruiter who's interviewing people, as well as an individual who's interviewing for a role.
Yeah, and you got to remember your why. Why are you doing recruiting in the first place?
Oh yeah, you're right. You're true north. You said you're true north.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
true
that
north.
a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Suzie, and we'll see you at RecruitDC. I've really enjoyed this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being here.
And thanks for coming on Where's Your Next. For those of our audience, thanks for watching. Again, we're sponsored by HireScale and Gannon over at HireScale, the free recruiters marketplace for freelance. And with that, have a great day. We'll see you next time on Where's Your Next.